what can you do with a psychology degree? So that's a question that we will hope to answer in this presentation. So there are some general roles that you can take in when you become, or rather when you study psychology. This would involve probably doing your master's degree, or maybe a PhD, or just a bachelor's degree is enough. But these are typically the roles that is purely based on psychology that you can do. The first and foremost and the most popular one is that of a clinical psychologist. So what, for example, the course that you will be learning, that is psychopathology, you will be steering towards becoming a clinical psychologist. For this, for sure, you need a master's degree and an MPhil degree. Essentially, you will be dealing with patients. You will also be working closely with psychiatrists who can prescribe medicines, and you cannot. But what you will be a specialist in different kinds of therapies. So you have cognitive behavior therapy, you have psychotherapy, you have gestalt therapy. There are various kinds of therapies that you will learn about, and therefore you will be able to address the patient's situation depending on what therapy might work best. So that's a role of a clinical psychologist. Now, the second one is a counselor. So this is based on counseling psychology. It's not that different from a clinical psychologist, but the counselors basically work on more everyday issues, such as family problems or relationship issues, problems with academia, problems with, let's say, your sports, whatever it is. So you sit with the person and you talk to that person, and they just help you gain some kind of an insight in understanding what is going on and what can you do. So clinical psychologists probably will be dealing with issues such as depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, but the counselor will not be doing that. So that's the primary difference between the two of them. You can get into social work as well. When you're working with a small population or a specific population, you need to know how to address people. You need to know how to engage in conversations with people. You need to be sensitive. So, and at the same time, you need to make sure what you're doing actually comes out properly. So social work is also a very, very important role. You can be a social activist as well. Especially, for example, when you learn in social psychology, you will learn about collective action. So what can you do to come together and, for example, protest a particular cause? When you're working towards the betterment of a minority community, you could be a climate change activist as well. It's absolutely anything, but the knowledge of psychology would really help you in your activism. And last but not the least, which is very related to being a social activist, is humanitarian work as well. There is something called creative movement therapist, and this is relatively new. So this is where you have your art therapy, dance therapy, theater, drama therapy, and these are basically creative movements. So you can get an extra degree in these particular subjects, and obviously using creative movements such as art, drama, and theater, you will be helping music as well. You will be helping the patient overcome certain issues that they might probably have. So these are the general roles, for example, that you might be taking on as a psychologist, as someone who studied psychology. Now, let's look at some different settings where you can actually use your degree. So we have an educational setting. The most common role that you can take is that of an educational psychologist. An educational psychologist helps in developing, for example, the curriculum, in helping students in the way that they are. So for instance, let's take the example of children with special needs. So there's an ongoing debate between whether they should be studying in special schools or they should be integrated with the other children. So typically an educational psychologist with probably a social worker, will come together and see the way that the two groups can basically integrate and study together. So that would be the role of an educational psychologist, predominantly in an educational setting. School counselor. So again, this is similar to a counselor, but the setting will mainly be that of a school. You can also be a special needs educator. Again, you probably have to have another degree. So working with children with special needs, working with adults with special needs, it requires a lot of patience, a lot of empathy. You need to know exactly how someone is behaving and how not to react, how to respond, and educating the parents as to how you're supposed to be with someone who has autism or ADHD or Down syndrome. So special needs education is also something that you can take on. Of course, you have the role of academia, which is what where I have got into, and Professor Barucha as well. You work at universities, you start with your PhD, then you climb the ladder, postdoc, lecturer, so on and so forth. Typically, you teach at the university level over here, but you can also do research. So let's just say you're a scientist in that regard. You have a research topic, and then you try and figure out and engage in experimental work or not to try to understand certain problems, certain scientific problems, and continue with it. So again, literally every field of psychology that you learn, you can do research in that field. So if you're interested in discovering new things, then researcher is something that might be of interest to you. The next setting we'll see is the basically policy making setting. So this is not necessarily you taking the role of a psychologist. This is how you can use your psychology degree in these aspects. Now let's look at health organizations. So for example, WHO. We all know what's happening all over the world, that's COVID. So for example, let's say that some studies found, researchers have conducted some research finding that this is the best way to deal something is the best way to deal with mental health and well-being. So what you can do is take that result and share it with the health organization so that they can implement that into their policy, which will directly result in the way our mental health would end up being. So a lot of policy making situations can come by learning psychology. Similarly, if you are coming up with an intervention plan to reduce or to counter smoking or alcoholism, or to increase healthy behavior or exercise behavior, again, you'll be able to use the research that researchers do and implement it in such settings, and you would be able to see the effect of the two. So essentially what's happening is we are building a bridge between the research and practice over here, and that's one point that Professor Barucha mentioned, that it's an integrated field. So we have to work with each other to actually get something out of it. Political strategies as well. So you can work in political think tanks, for example. Again, based on research, let's just say that certain ideologies, certain people are more favorable towards certain policies, and then that can be implemented by the government. But I mean, that's a bit of a nuanced topic, whether the government will actually do it or not. But this is how you share the information, saying, hey, listen, most people here do not want this. Most people here want this. Most people here do not, for example, if you say, what do you think about your attitude towards Trump building a huge wall between the border of US and Mexico? And if most people say they completely oppose it, you can take that study, you can take those results and then go to the Trump government. And if you're working within the government setting and say, listen, most people don't want it. Like I said, whether the government will listen to you or not is a totally different thing, but that's also one thing that you can do. You can get into the science of climate change. A lot of why do people engage in environmentally friendly behavior? How can they engage in environmentally friendly behavior? Why is it that people are skeptic towards the issue of climate change? Why don't they believe that climate change actually exists? What can we do to make people more forthcoming when it comes to understanding about climate change and doing something as simple as recycling? So you can definitely be in climate change research. This can be in the policy setting, it can be in the research setting, it can be absolutely anything. You can these are these are rather interconnected. You can help with laws related to immigration, you can relate it to integration as well. If you have migrants coming, for example, to a different country, what you can do to integrate them into a society, or if they're coming from a different state in the Indian context, how you can help them in the integration context. That's also something that you can do. There's a bunch of other settings that you can also look into. So, for example, advertising and consumer behavior. So we all look at an advertisement and then we are tempted to either buy something or we are not. What's actually happening is that the advertisers are saying, okay, something like this would tempt people to go to have some favorable attitudes towards this product, so let's do that. And basically what's happening is that is your psychological knowledge that's being put into advertising. Certain words might work better than the other words. Similarly, consumer behavior is what kind of decisions that you take, that you engage in to buy something, what kind of decisions you engage in for, let's say, even something as simple as shopping. So advertising and consumer behavior is one such setting where you can really use psychology. We are in a generation of social media. You can work in any social media company, Twitter, Facebook, whatever it is, because this is psychology. With Twitter, for example, if you're looking at hate speech, you can taper it down. When it comes to Facebook, if you have algorithms in Facebook, right? So actually, what they found out was when you write post that is related to emotions of astonishment and interest or so on and so forth, the algorithm picks that up and it generates your post in other feeds. So you have such nuanced things. So having a psychological knowledge in this area, it will also be extremely useful. For those of you who just want to write content, what kind of content is going to be eye-catching, what is going to keep people's interest, what kind of content is good, and in terms of also morally good, what is humanizing versus dehumanizing content, how can we be less biased in our writing, how can we make sure we don't engage in stereotyping while writing. All of this can come with the knowledge of psychology. Public relations is also something you work with people, so you know how to talk to people and so on and so forth. Sports is another area where what you can look into. So if you are an athlete yourself, or if you want to get into the sports field, why do some players perform better than the other? What are the different the reasons why some people do not perform properly? So for example, if you see one day the Indian cricket team has performed really badly, you'll sit and analyze and see what went wrong. There's perhaps too much anxiety, perhaps there's the kind of cognitions, the kind of emotions that they are experiencing. Again, it's all in this the psychology domain. And finally, this is something new you can do, cultural training. Right now, where we're in a multicultural society, right? And it's very important to understand different cultures so that you can engage with everyone. So many people engage in cultural training practices. When I used to live in Europe, there were cultural trainers wherein they try to integrate Europeans and, let's say, Indians or Spanish people or Italians, and just to make sure that everyone understands each other and the whole process is smooth.